Just real quick, you guys want to introduce yourselves? We can just start with you, Hassan.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Hassan Naqvi. I focus on forming digital health partnerships across the enterprise at Astra Zeneca. Astra Zeneca is a chronic disease company for the most part, so we are, for our medications to really benefit the patients, we are very invested in the upstream care pathway going right for those patients, and of course downstream going well for them as well. And digital is one of the ways that we can drive that forward. So the company overall kind of recommitted itself to a digital approach very recently, and my team, which is called the Commercial Digital Health Team, was born. So yeah, that's what I do, and I come from the oncology business unit within AstraZeneca. I've been with the company for about 5 years. I am very happy to be back in Nashville. I have a connection with Nashville in a previous life. I used to work at Vanderbilt in the tech transfer office focused on digital health, and I was involved in battling the powers that be at Vanderbilt to convince them to spin off RedCap as a newco. And now we, amongst several other pharma companies, are contracting with RedCap, the paid version of RedCap, that is. So very nice to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Hassan. Neha?
Neha Jain, Senior Director of Precision Medicine at Oncology, PhD by training. Don't have very extensive bio like my friend Hassan here, but been at Vanderbilt for almost a decade and been in the same precision oncology space, and that's what I do at Oncology. Very happy to be here.
Thanks. Neha, Bobby?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bobby Reddy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you guys today. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer of Pi Health. I'm a dermatologist and a melanoma researcher by background. I started my career in academics and transitioned to industry. I still see patients in Boston at Mass General, so I really always want to learn about how things are happening in the community, and it's really an honor to be part of this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. So why don't we start with you, and why don't you just, tell everybody what you're doing over there at TI?
Yeah, it's Pi Health, like Pi, like the mathematics, so, but it's okay. But we're a technology company that helps health systems and life science companies improve the way they do clinical trials. At a health system level, what we do is we help sites capture the kind of data that regulatory agencies like the FDA are looking for when they make decisions on drugs from the very beginning of patient care journey, because often that sort of data is elusive. It makes it very challenging to collect later on, and it makes the whole clinical trial process very inefficient and high cost. So we help these sites capture this sort of data, but we also have our technology solution that makes it easier for them to do clinical trials. I like to call it the TurboTax of clinical trials, because we have a structured data interface that allows them to say, hey, capture this, capture that, in a way that it's easier for research nurses, any supporting staff, and ultimately, for physicians and investigators. And we use generative AI to automate clinical documentation, such as notes, prior authorizations, and referral letters, things that are important, but providers generally don't get excited about having to do them. So we always felt like creating technologies that decreases administrative burden at sites is important. We also have generative AI in tools such as patient enrollment and screening features that makes those processes more efficient. And for life science companies, we have generative AI in helping design and build protocols for clinical trials. So our company is about 4.5 years old, but we've officially kind of announced our fundraise and went public in the public environment in March, on Pi Day, March 14th. So we're very excited about that. And we operate in 4 countries. We're in the US, we're in India, we're in Australia, and Brazil. And our whole purpose is to really help patients all over the world, especially in communities, because that's where most of the patients are seen, have equal access to clinical trials and innovative medicines.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not to have you follow that, but what are you doing over at Oncology, which is equally as important, but maybe not quite as technical?
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Um, I haven't even started, guys. So. So it's kind of bringing back memories when I was here last year around the same time. Does anybody was here?
Yeah.
So don't have that expectation, guys. I have no jokes today. All right. So precision oncology. Yeah. So my role is to create services for precision oncology and make precision oncology accessible. As providers, you all order NGS tests, and sometimes they look complete, sometimes they don't look complete. There's a host of things that is being built in that space, and my role is to make that digestible and easy for you to process and have that available to a point of care. And so, yeah, I spend my time, I feel like I've probably emailed most of you, although I've never met some of you. So, yeah, anytime you have an NGS report that's difficult, and, these reports typically are very long, 50 pages, 40 pages, and just quickly looking at it and summarizing what's critical and what to look for, what to avoid, what's a red flag, just things like that is what I do on a daily basis.
She is the AI, basically.
I'm the, oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I have, we have some AI at One Oncology, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's talk about AI. So Hassan, you want to start are you guys looking at anything? You've got a sort of a unique lens. You've got the clinical background. Now you're on the pharma piece of it. Is your company looking to do anything with AI as far as studies and outcomes and all that sort of thing?
We are, and there's a couple of different layers to that aspect. So Bobby was talking about Pi, about his company, and so if we kind of follow on that thread as an example, right, that would be one layer from an operational perspective, which is speeding up the clinical trial, getting the pre-auths like that. That really resonated with me because before coming over here, I was part of another discussion with the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Florida where they were talking about using AI to increase the level of pre-auth approvals because there was a lot of declines that were happening. And so you can see kind of very quickly how this one piece with Pi kind of grows into other aspects as well, right? You can connect it to payers, you can connect it from a policy perspective, and at an operational layer that helps speed up the clinical trial by helping us overcome some of those gaps from that perspective. On top of that, there is another layer in terms of enrollment, better designing clinical trials, understanding, for example, for the drugs that are getting pushed through our pipeline, especially as our pipeline becomes more and more sophisticated. So you started off once upon a time with small molecules. Now we're going more and more into biologicals. They become more complex by themselves. Identifying the right kind of patient, the patient that's most likely to benefit from that, and doing that at pace becomes really, really important for that piece. And then, of course, being able to get to a decision, go, no go, is this something which is safe and efficacious, and therefore we invest in it to push forward, versus recalibrating and reinvesting in other medications and driving those forward. That becomes very important as well. So we are working across those layers. So as you can see, there's different flavors of AI that kind of fall through a number of those layers and weave that together. So as an example, with my wonderful AZ team, with Robert and Melissa, we've been working on things like natural language processing, doing chart audits just to discover phenotypes, and then you tie that together with some precision medicine companies, and multimodal, which is an up-and-coming buzzword, speaking of buzzwords, to kind of identify the ideal patient for our drugs, which means the patients who would respond the most to those. And you couple that with, of course, some of the things that you were talking about, integrating that into the physician workflow in terms of both patient enrollment, as well as for the clinical trial dynamics as well, to kind of drive that through. Not only make that faster so that we can get drugs faster to the market, but also get the right drugs.
There's something you said that sort of piqued my interest, and some others might be interested too. So you said to help with clinical trial design. I know you elaborated on it a little bit, but could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Like, so how is AI helping you with the actual design of the trial?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little story. At ASCO, I think a couple of years ago, that there was a report out of a clinical trial. I forget the name of the company, and so they were talking about standard of care, and standard of care, of course, was it had a certain kind of response. And then they had drug A, and drug A had a really good response. Then they were bringing 2 drugs out from the market. And then drug B had a really good response independently. But drug A and B didn't work so well. So it was against expectations, and the combo therapy which they were going after, which was going to be their big thing, never made it to the market. So fast forward about 2 or 3 years later, there's a paper that came out of Mass General talking about using precision medicine, deep sequencing, machine learning, and AI, which I call multimodal, to re-examine that data and see if there were different cohorts of responders. And it turns out that there was a group of super responders within that group. But at the time when the trial was run, 3-4 years ago, that technology and that realization was not. So that for me personally, that is very, very interesting. As an example, to be able to identify definitively whether a drug is going to be efficacious before you put it away on the shelf or pull it away from the shelf, just as an example. And then you can think about this in several different dimensions. Diversity is going to be one piece of this. Are we, based on our geography, based on the geography where we're running the trials, do we have the right mix of people that are in the trial so that we can have the regulatory conversation? Now there is increasing, as we go into the biologics, Keytruda, for example, when it came out on the market, if memory serves, it was $250,000 a pop, I think, for a round of treatment. So there is a pricing negotiation pressure as well, which means that we have to show and demonstrate value, that this is not just a drug for with limited efficacy, but this is a drug that's going to truly differentiate and meet the needs for patients who otherwise would have little to no hope. And so all of these aspects have to be data-driven and driven by machine learning and AI, because there might be a lot of needles in that haystack, but it's a very big haystack.
For us to work. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Neha, what are you guys doing?
Before I even go there, I was thinking about this conference, artificial intelligence, and you had your definition up when you were talking about artificial intelligence, and I was thinking that how would I define artificial intelligence? And I felt like anything that you know how to do, but it's humanly impossible. Like if someone showed me 5 data points and asked me which one is like the biggest, I'll be like, oh, it's this one. But if there are 5 million, then you can't do that, right? So that's like there's code for that. So if there's like 5 other dimensions to that, it's just anything that's doable but humanly hard is where AI can serve. And one of the things that you touched upon, and we were chatting about, this data segmentation. And you have piles and piles, and you talked about this is so much data on everything and everybody. And when you talk about medical data, it's structured or unstructured. Unstructured is a huge mess. All of you are familiar. There's NLP, there's different ways to understand it. But if you look at structured data, it's not easy to work with, right? Like if it's like 15 data points, 15,000, it's fine. But there's tons of genomic data, whole exome sequencing, whole genome sequencing, there's pharmacogenomics, there's the variability with the ethnicity. There's so much. And I'm just talking about the DNA. We are not even talking about proteomics and like gut biome and whatnot. There's so many variables. When you have so much data, making sense of it, you need a tool like that can understand patterns, or even for that case, segment the data in a meaningful way. Sometimes, and everybody who has a PhD knows it, data can speak the story you want it to speak, right? It's like how you look at it, how you segment it. So it's a skill. I mean, it is true. Something's cracking up. So like understanding how to segment the data and seeing patterns where it's really hard because this is the sheer volume of it. So that's all the structured data part where AI can really help. And if it's unstructured, then just natural language processing. We had an experience with a vendor where we were trying to read, like if I give you a piece of paper where Dr. Aerosmith had a note where they were like, oh, like this patient seems to be progressing, but they're not really progressing. I don't know, doctors write stuff like that all the time, right? I mean, it's not always very clear. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's also, I think there is a reason why the thing is written like that. So you need some kind of algorithm to make sense of it. So when you look at clinical trials, the criteria, just having the ability to do natural language processing on unstructured data and having that lens to meaningfully segment the structured data, I think that could really, that's the answer.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think my presentation spoke to that too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's great. But are you guys doing anything currently?
So we have an in-house solution that I can barely see Andy, but I can now see it. It's called Prompt. It stands for Provider Messaging for Precision Therapies. And the power it has is, and we've bashed Onco EMR enough that I won't do that, but we have these reports in PDF. But anything, if you want to look at, if you have a patient who has a mutation in a particular disease, and you want to understand how is this patient different, like what do you want to do? That PDF does nothing. But when you have the structured data, and that's the things we hope to build in Prompt, you can actually see that, oh, like I have a BRAF V600E lung cancer patient. This is a rare mutation, but because, again, we have a big network, there's that power of aggregation of data. And you can see that, oh, throughout the One Oncology network, there are 150 patients like that. Can I understand how those did on therapy A versus therapy B? And can I use that to inform my choice? That's the power of data, and that's the kind of thing that we can make available at point of care. So that particular thing that I just gave an example, that I can do today for you. If you ask me, I actually look this up. That's why I have the numbers, the BRAF V600E. But in Prompt, we actually have all the data structured. So you see what mutation your patient had and what drugs would be recommended based on that. If you have a report from 2 years ago, your report is static in time. And I think one of the things that I think so much about is how do you future-proof these things? If I have an NGS report from 2 years, it's stuck in time in 2 years. The patient is moving along. So that's why we have these solutions, because Prompt will tell you what therapy they can get today based on the approvals that came between that report and this time. So that's what is alive right now at One Oncology. I'm very proud of it.
That's awesome.
Okay.
So Bobby, clinical trial space is mainly what you guys are doing, and you guys are already using AI quite a bit. You kind of explained that to us. Where do you kind of see you guys going in the clinical trial space with AI?
Yeah. There's a lot of different paths and implementation and needs for AI in this space. But, to kind of go off what Neha is saying, like, how do you think about data is fundamentally, one of the most important issues, because for clinical trials, the quality of the data is very important, right? Because if you do not have good data, ultimately it's just a, it doesn't do justice for the patient who's put their time and their health in the clinical trial. So you really need to collect good data for that patient, to their journey through the trial to be as important for the development of medicines. Hence, we don't like unstructured data. and fundamentally, as a physician, I just know it's just a mess, right? And unstructured data, when you're trying to get something good out of it, I think I've seen a lot of LLM models, a lot of NLPs. It doesn't work out good. There's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. And it's just the way it is. But physicians, it's a burden, right? Like you don't go into this field to write notes. You go into this field to care for patients. And every year there's like more administrative things, challenges that physicians face, like reimbursement challenges, the time that you get to spend on seeing patients versus looking at screens. It feels like it's minimizing. So you can't, force people to, hey, can you write better notes? I've written, I think, some of the worst notes in the history of medicine. And it's just because we've all been in that situation. You copy forward, you just do this because you want to focus on taking care of patients. So when our software, we basically have structured fields that, that are important to how drug development is evaluated, both from a safety and effective perspective. And when you submit this sort of data to the, for the life science page, it's called case report form. This is like what drug applications go through. We've embedded those structured fields kind of at the interface at the EMR level. So from the very beginning, we could, our software could train non-physician providers like research and nurses and medical assistants to put in as much of that data as possible. And from that structured data, that's where we use AI to, create notes, create other efficiencies. We feel that although the step of entering the data is a bit more arduous, the quality of what you can do with it is exponentially higher, and so that's how we approach the structured versus unstructured problem. But yeah, in most of the world, you see unstructured data, and there still have to be, tools to, make, valuable insights out of it. And outside of clinical trials, it's different, and it's not always about, you have to have pristine data. You have to have data that is actionable. And so I think there's, room for, all different sorts of technologies in the space.
Sure. Hassan, given your experience, what you're seeing now sort of on the global scale, what do you think some of the barriers we're going to run into, especially on the practice side, as we're trying to implement AI? What do you sort of worry about for us?
So from my perspective, there is tremendous potential. Colleagues have heard me say this. I was at HIMSS and I told everybody, like, I went to church for digital health, right? And I was filled with the Holy Spirit of digital health over there, because the possibilities are varied, and it's the potential is tremendous over there. But the challenge is the disconnect. So as an example, Neha was talking about prompt, and we've talked about prompt a couple of times, and I think that it's brilliant, right? You were talking about EMR integration. One of the questions that I ask people is workflow integration because of the EMR problem, right? And so for one reason or the other, your organization is focused on EMR integration, and that's fine because you guys make it work. Prompt is something that helps kind of address, for example, alert fatigue. It obligates the physicians to take a particular action, and those are all things which are fantastic, but they're in the workflow. They're kind of integrated into the workflow of one organization. So what is it going to take to scale that? That's one of the first issues, right? Is there's a ton of really good ideas, really good analytics that are sitting in different parts of the healthcare continuum, but how do we connect them together and how do we make them scale? And so EMR can be a vehicle for that. Payer-driven in real-world healthcare settings, for example, some payer-driven kind of initiatives might be another aspect of that. So from our perspective, what I look at the same time is all of the possibilities, but also the limitations at the same time, and kind of bridging the gap between the two in a way that addresses our business priorities in the most efficient way, right? Because it's early days for all of us, right? We're all going through that transition to digital health. We're all trying to figure out what this means. In some cases, digital might be more core to the business than in others, but it's, for me, the biggest challenge and the biggest frustration is I want to get things done, but there are these gaps, of course, in the middle, and it's going to take all of us to kind of figure that out. So that's one of the reasons I'm in the position that I'm in, which is partnership. We're not a digital health company, we're a pharma company. So from a pharma perspective, we can look at what digital can do, and the way to kind of bring that about is through entering into partnerships with provider institutions, with the tech, with payers. And so,
no, absolutely, I agree. I'm going to jump over here to you, Bobby, real quick. I know that when through email you and I sort of talked about you sort of have some experience where implementing AI has been, you run into some challenges and some, so you want to tell us some of your experience and what you've seen and the challenges of getting AI to help us?
Yeah, no, I there's a few challenges, but I could, point something that I've experienced that I think people in this room can easily relate to. So I'm a dermatologist, and there was there's a wave of companies that are like, hey, we could screen moles through a phone and kind of make a diagnosis, and it's going to save so much, save patients' lives and save unnecessary medical procedures and all of the, great things that everyone wants. But the challenge with it practically is it's a little bit about risk. If you are, if you have a lot of experience, seeing patients, with pigmented lesions, which are, like the medical term for moles, and you're, understand how to differentiate between what is, potentially at a risk for cancer and what's benign, and you can watch, you have, you're able to assume a certain level of risk, because there's always a risk. There's no 100% that is right for the patient, and that it'll make them feel more comfortable when they leave your office. It'll save them, an unnecessary, procedure that, will scar them and will make them more concerned. If you're, an AI algorithm, you're always going to gear towards a risk level that is the lowest possible, right? So what I've found was, when I was working with some of these companies, they were, what they ended up doing was they would classify many more lesions as risk and needing evaluation and biopsy than kind of an experienced, physician looking at it. So a technology that was supposed to be more accurate in diagnosis and save, quote unquote, unnecessary procedures, ended up giving a lot more unnecessary procedures, because they classified a lot of things as risk and evaluate. And you go see a dermatologist then, and then they would do the biopsy. So you're now getting a lot more biopsies than you would have without the tool. And it comes to the fact that, like, as a technology, are you going to, kind of assume the risk for what happens? And as a company, well, they won't. But when you're a physician, this is what you do every day, and you have to think about the patient. And if you're not, comfortable with that element of it, it's, you're in the wrong business. But that's where I see, like, some of the challenges. It's like, how do these tools think about what's appropriate for the patient, not just like, hey, like, let's come down to some algorithm where, like, there's 100% this or 99% this and that. From that practical standpoint, it's problematic.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up a great topic. Shout out to Natalie Dixon, who's going to talk about this after dinner. You guys talk about legal and ethics when it comes to AI, but yeah, you're right. These companies, they don't want the risk, right? They don't want to carry the risk. And so, yeah, it ended up backfiring. Probably last question before we'll take questions from the audience, because we just want to get everybody to dinner. Neha, like, what do you sort of see as the barriers? Like, how are we going to sort of mitigate and navigate these gaps that we are most likely going to see as we move forward in this space?
I think healthcare is sadly always the last to arrive at technology.
You're right.
It's just we're very slow in adapting. Like, if you go to Amazon or Walmart, and if you want something, you can find how many of that particular item you want are at the location, and like Brentwood and downtown. But we don't know that much about the slots on clinical trials. Like, that's something that we constantly are struggling with. So I think making investments in tech solutions is something that we need to do in healthcare if you want to solve these problems. AI doesn't have all the answers, but I think it's a great potential way to go. So yeah, I think investment in tech solutions would be I think the biggest barrier that a lot of healthcare company faces. I was at Vanderbilt before I moved to OneOncology, and there's this perception that big academic institutions spend a lot on technology. That was not my experience.
I have that perception.
That's
not true, Larry. Yeah, so it's I think it's a mindset change that we need to invest in tech and build solutions where we need those. So
I agree. Shout out to Andy. Get the checkbook ready. If Patton's here, make sure he's on board too.
Andy's amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's open it up for questions. Any questions for these guys about sort of? So surely some physicians have some questions. Yeah, Jeff.
Now, you were mentioning taking sort of in-house data on patients that'll respond differently to different therapies, for example. And so in my mind, that's a retrospective review of something that normally we would go through. I mean, it would have to be published and have to be vetted and all of that. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, back to you with the medical legal aspect of, okay, this is our in-house stuff and we have this information that we think is real. And what are your thoughts on sharing, or how do you, I guess, resonate that with the academic level of things?
I think it's a great question. Thanks. So I think I've talked about this in the past sometimes, the concept of a digital twin or a patient like mine. So there's two ways to think about it. One is if you look at within oncology, we have over 1,000 providers, and I can never keep track of how many patients we have. It's like a lot of patients, right? And with personalized medicine, with precision medicine, the power is that we have such a huge network, because if something is very rare, you're going to see it enriched a little bit. So if you have a patient that is like really rare and you're like, well, don't really fit any of the guidelines, and there's like 2 guidelines, which one should I follow? At that point, understanding within our OneOncology network, saying that, 3 of my colleagues, I've never met them, but they're within the network, they have seen someone like this. Like maybe just phone a doc, just talk to them that, hey, I have a patient like that. This is how I think about treating them. I see that you have someone similar. What do you say? And I think when that data, now it's different, because if it's outside OneOncology, like data sharing and all of that, there's much more nuances. There are ways to put data in DID, and I'm not signing us up for anything here because, but there are registries and there's so many ways. But aggregate data, there's so much power and there's so much that can be done. But I think within OneOncology, there's huge untapped opportunity to do that.